Well, good morning, my JFK fellow travelers. It's Saturday morning. I always enjoy doing a show or an episode on Saturday morning because I'm not under the gun to get it finished before first period starts. My students start walking in the door. I've got plenty of time. I don't have to race. So it's a cold day. It looks like an inside day today. Okay, well, we started talking yesterday, episode 35, about Jack Ruby. And the question we wanted to answer yesterday, and hopefully I did, was Jack Ruby just some distraught nightclub owner in Dallas who acted impulsively and, you know, is exactly what he said he was, just someone who felt bad for Jackie and wanted to spare her the prospect of a trial and having to come back to Dallas and testify, yada yada. And of course, the Warren report painted him as such. He was not attached to anybody, kind of like Lee Harvey Oswald. Um, you know, I'm so skeptical of any report the government puts out anymore. Whenever they say yes, I think no. When they say up, I think down. So when they say Oswald was a lone nut, I know he wasn't. And when they say Jack Ruby was not affiliated with the mob, I know he was. Or Jack Ruby was not affiliated with the FBI as an informant, or the CIA as a gun runner to Cuba, or the Teamsters Union, or the Dallas Police. I mean, good grief, it just goes on and on. So that was yesterday. And today, I don't usually like to do this, but there's, I think it applies in this situation, and it would actually detract from the presentation if we didn't answer multiple questions. So here goes nothing. I've got 5 questions today. And I'm going to move my face one more time. All right, there we go. So the first thing we want to kind of deal with is there any evidence, anecdotal or hard evidence, that shows that Ruby had any foreknowledge of the assassination? Any indication this was going to happen? Just do his actions betray him, his words, such that we know that he knew something was fixing to happen? Second question, is there any evidence Jack's own actions 2 days later, the shooting of Oswald, were premeditated? You know, he said, well, it was just a spontaneous thing, and that's what the Warren Commission believed. So we'll look at that. My third question, where's Waldo? We're going to trace the movements of Ruby on the day of the assassination and thereafter, and you're going to be amazed. This guy is when you ever see the movie Forrest Gump? Forrest Gump was like everywhere something important was happening. You know, of course, it's a fictional character. This guy is Forrest Gump. I mean, him and Oswald both. We've already looked at Oswald and how he's everywhere. But here's Jack Ruby. And he always beats everybody to the punch. He's got front row seat because he got there first. All right, so I called that question, where's Waldo? Fourth question is, besides his FBI, CIA, mafia, and Teamsters and connections that we learned about yesterday, are there any other connections that made it possible for him to shoot Oswald? So we'll look at that today, specifically with regard to the Dallas police. That's kind of what the direction I want to go today. And then lastly, how did Ruby's actions after the shooting, after he shot Oswald, was there anything about his actions that were peculiar, that indicate that he knew his life depended on killing Oswald, not just shooting him, but killing him? So if you're ready, we'll get started. This is a picture of, I keep calling him Oswald. This is a picture of Ruby holding court with the press. Ruby fancied himself, he's going to even pretend to be this over the weekend while Oswald's being paraded around Dallas Police as sort of a quasi reporter. And he liked to hold court with the press. And of course, he was a big man around town, despite what the Warren Commission says. And he had friends in the press that he regularly gave scoops to. And in addition to being a informant for the FBI, one could say he was also a source for not a lot, but for a couple prominent media members. And he liked the limelight. He liked being front and center. So I like this picture because it just kind of shows him in his element, enjoying the crush of the media, enjoying the attention, holding court, and such and such. All right. So I told you we're going to trace his movements. So let's look first at the day before the assassination, which is November 21st, 1963. And I will start by saying there's going to be some overlap here when we get into the investigations and the conspirators. Ruby's going to come up time and time again. You're going to see his movements even before November 21st. For the purposes of today, I'm trying to narrow the focus a little bit to that weekend. So November 21st, 1963, Ruby is speaking to the assistant DA in Dallas. His name is Ben Ellis. And Ben Ellis doesn't know him. They've never met. But Ruby makes a point to go and speak to him, and he says, quote, "You probably don't know me now, but you will." And Ellis remembers this, of course, after Ruby shoots Oswald, and he makes a note of, he actually reports this to, you can see this letter here, and it's a letter to Mr. Curry, the chief of police. He says, "Hey, I had this interesting little interaction with Jack Ruby on the 21st, 3 days ago or so." He wrote this on the 25th, so 4 days ago. And he tells him, he says, you probably don't know me, but but you will. And he said, "I don't know if this will help you in your investigation. I don't know. I'm just telling you what happened." And the last paragraph, he kind of spells it out. He says, "As subject was leaving the office." Well, let's go to the second paragraph. "The above captioned subject, Ruby, came into the office while we were there, and I don't know what that says. Something out, some advertisement concerning a stripper known as Jada. To my knowledge, subject did not stand at the window, nor did he pause any length of time at the window. As subject was leaving the office, Assistant District Attorney Don Ellis and Todd Stodghill entered. Subject introduced himself to Ben Ellis and told Mr. Ellis, 'You probably don't know me now, but you will.'" So anyway, this is an interesting interaction, to say the least, especially because 3 days later, the whole wide world's going to know who he was. So um, on the 22nd, the next day, we have another interesting interaction where, again, Ruby seeks out somebody. A fellow FBI informant. So Bob Vanderslice is what Ruby was, a FBI informant, and maybe it appears that they knew each other. So he testifies. Now this doesn't come out until later, whereas Ben Ellis reported this on the 25th of November, 3 days after the assassination. This information doesn't come out until 1977 when the House Select Committee is investigating. So you see how at the time you have one little bit data point. It's unusual, but it doesn't make a pattern. But then in 1977, when Bob Vanderslice comes out, all of a sudden, oh, now you have a pattern. But you didn't know that for 15 years. So anyway, he testified in 1977 that, quote, "On the morning of the assassination, Ruby contacted him and asked if he would, quote, like to watch the fireworks." So he said, "I was with Jack Ruby. We were standing at the corner of the Postal Annex building facing the Texas School Book Depository building at the time of the shooting." So here we have, on the 21st, "You don't know me now, but you will." And then on the 22nd, before the motorcade comes through, he contacts somebody and says, a friend of his, and says, "Let's go watch the fireworks." And of course, Vanderslice does not report this or testify to this event until 15 years later. All right, now that was early on the 22nd. A little bit later on the 22nd, we're about 11 a.m. now, according to Julie Ann Mercer. She's sitting in traffic at Dealey Plaza, and traffic is backed up, and it's not moving. And so she's just kind of looking around. She's stuck in traffic and she's on the curbside. There's two lanes there, but she's on the curbside. And there appears to be a truck parked several car lengths ahead up on the curb, but it's kind of blocking her lane a little bit. And people are having to drive around this truck. And she's annoyed by this because this is it appears this is what's causing uh, the traffic problem. So anyway, she's sitting in this traffic jam at 11 a.m. on November 2 and 22 in Dealey Plaza. And she says she witnesses a truck, and there's two men inside the truck. It's parked up on the curb right in front of the Grassy Knoll. So you can kind of picture in your mind where this is. It's right where the fatal shot happened, basically. And it's partially blocking traffic. So it's not like they're making efforts to be, unobtrusive. They're sticking out like a sore thumb. She said while she was sitting there, the passenger got out the side door and reached around back in the bed, reached down into the bed, and picked up a rifle from the bed of the truck. The rifle was in a case. And he turns around, he walks up the Grassy Knoll with the rifle. And I've heard her say this several times in interviews. She knew that the president was coming to town, and the motorcade was coming to Dealey Plaza. In her mind, where she went was, well, this must be the Secret Service preparing for the president's arrival. And she, a little anecdote, she always says, well, the Secret Service isn't so secret. She's doing this in front of everybody. So anyway, he walks up the Grassy Knoll and she kind of watches him. Finally, the traffic moves a little bit and she gets up to the truck and then gets even with the truck. Then it stops a little bit. And she turns and she looks at the driver who's still sitting in the truck. And the driver turns and looks at her and they both stare at each other. And she didn't know how long, it was several seconds, but she said, I got a very clear look at who this was. And then Oswald, then the shooting of the president, and 2 days later, the shooting of Oswald, and the image of Jack Ruby goes up on the TV. And she said, oh my God, that's the guy who was the driver of the truck. That was the guy in the truck. And she goes to the police, and here's her statement. She goes to Dallas police and gives it was actually to the sheriff's department. And she gives her statement. She said, she tells them the same story I just told you. And she said, it was Jack Ruby in that truck. I saw him clearly. And that was Jack Ruby. And this was a problem. Her testimony became a real problem for the Warren Commission. So they just do what they do. We've already seen it before. When Sylvia Odio's testimony is a problem, they say, well, she must have got her dates wrong. We've seen it with the Ford Mercury dealer. You saw him on the 25th. No, Oswald was on a bus going to Mexico City from New Orleans to Houston on the 25th. Must be mistaken. I don't know. That's what they do. They just they omit it altogether, or they just change it. So in this case, she testified to the Warren Commission. She told the Warren Commission the exact same thing she told the Sheriff's Department, the exact same thing I just told you. And then she went on about her business. And it wasn't until years later, when she was presented with a copy of her own signed statement from the Warren Commission, she realized that they changed her testimony and they forged her signature. She says, I didn't sign that. That's not my signature. And she had a way of signing where she could be specific and say, that's not my signature. Because the testimony didn't fit, right? Here is Ruby, who they say has no connection to anything. He's just this random guy who got upset about the assassination. Here he is, the date of the assassination, where the kill shot comes from, delivering a shooter to his location, delivering the shooter. Oh, that's not going to fit. So they changed her testimony and forged her signature. That was at 11 a.m. on the 22nd. Then the assassination happens. Of course, he meets with Vanderslice and they get their position, kind of like a parade. They just set up shop across from the Texas School Book Depository, watch it all. And then, obviously, what happens. The motorcade flees. It took a while for the Secret Service driver to realize there's a gas pedal in that limo. But he finally did, and he takes off heading for Parkland Hospital. In the motorcade, okay, this guy is in the motorcade. He's on the media truck. Dallas Times Herald journalist named Seth Cantor. And Seth Cantor is one of these media personalities, these writers that knows Jack Ruby real well because he gets stories from Jack Ruby. He's one of those guys I was telling you about earlier. They've worked together before. I say worked. Cantor did the writing. Ruby gave him the scoop. So he used him as a source. And Cantor, who's in the motorcade, arrives at the hospital with the motorcade. So they are the first ones there, right? Well, evidently not, because according to Cantor, as he's walking in the hospital, Jack Ruby's there. And Ruby sees him and calls out his name by name, calls him by name. Hey, Seth. He walks over to them and they shake hands and they begin having a conversation as they walk through the door into the stairwell. And right there at the bottom of the stairwell, they have a 5-minute conversation. And Cantor even remembers the subject of the conversation. Ruby wanted to know, he was all emotional and he wanted to know, should I close down my nightclubs because of what just happened in honor of the president and these events? And you think I should, he's talking to Cantor, and Cantor's like, well, I think that'd be a good idea. Yeah, Jack, I think that'd be a good idea. Yep, I think that's a good idea. And they just keep talking about the same subject for about, maybe not exactly 5 minutes, but it's a several minute long conversation. When Ruby is presented with the story later by the Warren Commission, they say, hey, somebody said that you were at the hospital. He said, no, I was not. I wasn't at the hospital. He denied it. In fact, he signed an affidavit saying that he was not at the hospital. Meanwhile, Seth Cantor signed an affidavit saying he was. So we have a he said, she said deal here. The reason this is important is because central to the Warren Commission's case is going to be a bullet that they find on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital. It's going to be the centerpiece of their case. They're going to call it the single bullet. It's based on a theory put forth by Arlen Specter, one of the counsel. He was junior counsel for the Warren Commission. And it somehow explains all the different wounds with just a few shots. I mean, they're going to claim there was 3 shots. 1 was a miss and 2 shots did all the damage. And basically this magic bullet, which is later it comes to be known, caused 7 wounds in 2 people. And it was the only way it could only be a single shooter. That's why it had to be a magic bullet. And they produced this, quote, magic bullet. They said it fell out on a stretcher of Governor Connolly's thigh, and it fell out on the stretcher, and they found it. Of course, it had no blood on it. It had no tissue on it. It was in virtually perfect condition. In fact, it's called, quote, the pristine bullet. And it is Exhibit CE 399 in the Warren Report. And there is no such bullet in the history of mankind that can cause 7 wounds in 2 people going through flesh and tissue and hitting bone. It comes out looking like that. It's not flattened at the edge. It has a tiny little dimple. That's it. Tiny little dimple. And anybody with a little bit of common sense can look at that bullet and realize that is not a bullet that caused 7 wounds at all. It can't be. But the question is, how'd that bullet get there? And there's a lot of suspicion by JFK researchers that Ruby was at the hospital, that Seth Cantor was telling the truth, and that his job at the hospital was to place that bullet on that gurney and then get out of there. And that's why he can't be seen there. He can't admit to having been there, because that places him in the location. It was in that same hallway where Seth Cantor saw him, where they found that bullet on that gurney. So now there's been an interesting story come out in the last year, and that is from a former Secret Service agent who said he went out into the car and found this bullet down in the seat, wedged there. He picked it up, put it in his pocket, came in and either gave it to somebody or sat it on the gurney. I don't know what to believe about that. Every time I hear somebody from the inside, especially the Secret Service, come up with some information like this, later, 30 years, 60 years later. And he's trying to sell a book. And it does harm to the single bullet theory. But this limited hangout stuff that they do, where they, because the evidence has changed and the original story is so far-fetched, doesn't make sense anymore. They dribble out information with just enough truth in it to make it sound believable. But anyway, that's not here nor there. I'm talking about Jack Ruby right now. And Ruby says he wasn't at the hospital. Cantor says he was, and he recalls the conversation verbatim, the topic of the conversation, the subject of the conversation, even including Ruby's emotional state, and he signs an affidavit of that. And anyway, we'll get into that bullet CE 399 later when we get to the investigations. But so we know now that Ruby, the day before the assassination, says something very suspicious sounding to Assistant DA Ben Ellis. The day of the assassination, he asks Vanderslice to meet him. They're going to take up shop from the Texas School Book Depository to watch the fireworks. Then at 11, he's dropping, according to Julianne Mercer, he's dropping off one of the gunmen on the Grassy Knoll, and he walks right up the grass. She just sits there and watches him, and then she sees full face picture image as he turns and looks at her, and she turns and looks at him, and knows that's Jack Ruby. And then we have, after the shooting, Seth Cantor seeing him at the hospital. So you think, if Cantor was in the motorcade and they sped off to go to the hospital, Ruby is there at the same time. So Ruby must have had his car available and sped off and either followed the motorcade or beat it to Parkland Hospital, was waiting for them. Like he knew what was going down, where it was going down, where to be. It's just amazing. And then we have on the day of the assassination, the story of George Applin. Where's Waldo again. George Applin is an off-duty crane operator. He's got the day off, and he decided to go watch a movie at the Texas Theater on the afternoon of November 22, 1963. So he's in the Texas Theater when the police burst through the door to arrest Oswald. He's sitting there, and he's sitting up near the front. And when these police come in and guns get pulled and all the commotion, he retreats to the rear of the theater and stood there and watched as the police surround Oswald, and then watches as Oswald jumps up, and there's they're wrestling him, and he's yelling at them, and all this commotion. And like I said, like he says, there's guns drawn. And while he's standing in the rear, Applin looks over and there's a man sitting in a back row seat, and he's kind of in the way. Officers are having to step around this guy to get where they need to go. And so Applin tells the guy, he says, you might want to move. And the guy just kind of looks at him. And later, after Oswald is shot by Ruby and the image comes up on TV, Applin goes down and he reports this to, again, the sheriff's department. And he says, Ruby was sitting down, just watching them, the police. And when Oswald pulled the gun and snapped it at the policeman's head and missed, and the darn thing wouldn't fire, that's when I tapped him on the shoulder and told him he'd better move because those guns were waving around. He just turned around and looked at me. Then he turned back around and started watching them. And he identified this man as Jack Ruby, sitting there watching the action. And so let's retrace now. He's been at the Texas, across the street from the Texas School Book Depository with, Vanderslice. Earlier that day, Julianne Mercer saw him at the Grassy Knoll dropping off a gunman. Seth Cantor sees him at the hospital, and George Applin sees him at the theater. He's literally rolling with the action. Everywhere an event is taking place that we learn about later, he's not Johnny come lately. He's not showing up 5 minutes after the fact. He's not after everybody's gone. He's there before it happens. He witnesses everything, like he knows something. And it gets better. After they arrest Oswald, they take him to Dallas Police Headquarters. And for the next 2 days, there are all kinds of witnesses who see Jack Ruby just hanging around Dallas Police Headquarters. He seems to be ever present. He's like God. He's just omnipresent. He's there everywhere, everywhere you look, like Santa Claus or something. Here you see on this slide, if you look at the upper left, I've got him circled. He's leaning in. It's a press gaggle. And the Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade is speaking and talking about this man that they've arrested, Lee Harvey Oswald. And he misspeaks, and he calls the Fair Play for Cuba Committee something other than it was. He got the verbiage or the words messed up. And Ruby interrupts him and said that would be the quote Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And he clarifies what the Dallas DA said, or his misspeak, how he had misspoken. He clarifies that for him. And he's acting like he's part of the media. He's hanging around. Witnesses said they even saw him with a little notebook and a pen. And he's following the press gaggle from room to room, up and down the hallways. Here he is at the press gaggle. Here is another picture of him. You can see he's got what looks like a pen in his hand, and then the other hand, he's got something that he's holding that he's writing on. So it's not like he's not trying to even blend. He's just, well, he is trying to blend in, but he's not trying to hide himself. Kind of stands out. He's the only one there wearing a black suit. But anyway, there he is. And here's another picture. They're in the hallway now. This is one of those occasions where they bring Oswald out and haul him up and down the hallway, and the media yells questions at him. And there's Ruby just mingling with all the people. You remember that story where we told that yesterday, where Harold Hunt told his contact, he says, go to the Dallas police and see what the security looks like. And the guy had a briefcase, and he walks up and down the hallways. He could have had a gun in the brief. Nobody stops him. It's the same deal. And he reports back to Harold Hunt, there's no security. Yeah, there's no security. So now we have Ruby doing the same thing. He's walking around. Of course, it turns out that the Dallas police know this guy, right? He's not a stranger to the Dallas police headquarters. Turns out he was a CI, a confidential informant for the Dallas police. He worked with the police. He would give them tips, usually squealing on his competitors, about crimes that were being committed in Dallas, and they would go act on those tips. And so he was a regular at Dallas Police Headquarters, and of course the Dallas Police were a regular at his nightclubs. He comped the Dallas Police officers, gave them free drinks, free food, free entertainment. And he also did this with the DA's office. So when Henry Wade is up there speaking, and he looks out at the guy interrupting him, that's Jack Ruby. But it's like nothing. If it had been anybody else, I'm sure Henry Wade would have been like, who are you? But it was Jack Ruby. And so he had familiarity with the DA's office and with the Dallas police, more than familiarity. Some of them were on his payroll. And of course, he was giving them information. We talked about yesterday how he was arrested 9 different times between the years 47 and 63, but he never got charged. He never had a trial. This is why. He was their guy. He was their guy. So he's blending in with people that he knows, and they're letting him. They're letting him. Just to augment my case about his close relationship with Dallas police, Officer Roscoe White, this is pictured top left there, was one of the regulars at his club. In fact, he was one of the guys that was paid by Ruby to be a presence at his club, and his presence alone would offer security. White's wife, pictured below, was actually on Ruby's payroll as a dancer. So that's interesting. Her name is Geneva White, and here he is I mean, it's such a creepy picture. I've always thought that was a creepy picture. Here is Ruby. And I guess this is what happens in nightclubs or environments like this. You gotta examine the goods, and that's what Ruby's doing. And her husband is also on his payroll, providing security, allowing his wife to be ogled by Jack Ruby. And then, of course, she's dancing by anybody who's in the club. It seems strange to me. But anyway, that's Roscoe White. And there's some stories, interesting stories that come out about Roscoe White and his son and stuff later. But I don't want to focus on that right now. Officer J.D. Tippett, whom we've met before, is the guy who ends up dead, was also on Ruby's Carousel Club payroll. So these are just a couple, but this is just to show that Ruby is not just connected with, as we learned yesterday, the Teamsters, Chicago Mafia, the Florida Mafia, the New Orleans Mafia, the CIA, and an FBI informant. He's also connected to Dallas police, and not just the police, the DA's office. Those are separate entities. And this is why he's the perfect man for what's fixing to happen. And he just blends in because it's almost like he's supposed to be there. He's one of them. All right, so let's continue with where's Waldo? Officer Billy Grammer, pictured here on the left, was in his office the night after the assassination, because now we're November 23. And Ruby walks in, and he knew him. It says he got a visit from someone he knew. And he didn't have to ask his name. He knew who he was. And Grammer says, quote, he was just like he always was. And they had an hour-long talk, both of them drinking coffee. And he says, Grammer says he never once mentioned Oswald. So this goes to that state of mind. Remember, Ruby's telling the Warren Commission, telling anybody else who will listen, I was so distraught about what happened in the assassination. And he kind of played that up in that meeting with Seth Cantor in the stairwell at the hospital. Cantor said he was emotional. He had tears in his eyes. He was emotional. He kept saying, should I close my clubs? Should I close my clubs? But here he's as cool as a cucumber. Never once mentions Oswald. Billy Grammer said, didn't seem to me he was upset at all. And so this is inconvenient testimony. It sure doesn't paint a picture of someone who's preparing to shoot somebody or just spur of the moment going to shoot somebody because he's so distraught. Later that night, after Ruby leaves, later that night, Grammer gets a phone call. And the person won't identify himself, but it's a man. And he had just had an hour-long conversation, and it sounded just like Jack Ruby, Grammer said. He started telling me about, quote, if we don't change the plans, we're going to kill Oswald in the basement. And he goes, I swear it was, in fact, he even says on the phone, Jack, is that you? And Jack and whoever was on the phone hung up the phone. He didn't get a chance to get an answer from him. He goes, it was Jack Ruby. I just had a conversation with him for an hour, and then I get this phone call. He won't tell me who he is, but it's clear it's Jack Ruby. I know his voice. Well, Dallas PD had made it public that Oswald was going to be transferred to the county jail, and they said it was going to be in this armored car, which you see here pictured leaving the Dallas Police Headquarters. What the public did not know, though, was that the armored vehicle was just a decoy. Oswald was actually going to be hidden and transferred in another vehicle to throw the media off the track, so to speak, or off the case. But as Grammer is talking to Jack Ruby, one of the things that Ruby said to him, allegedly, was that this guy that called knew about the subterfuge, and he told me about it. He told me he knew that Oswald was not going to be in the armored car. He was going to be in a separate car. He was going to be transferred separately. He's going to be hidden. He knew all the details. He knew what time, he knew where, he knew what car, he knew, he knew all the details. And Grammer was reported being surprised because he's like, nobody else knows this. Only people on the inside know this. How does this guy know this? And so he went and got a fellow high-ranking police officer to listen in on the phone call. He said, come here, you got to listen to this. And together, they, it kind of corroborated to him that this was important enough to at least type up a report about it. This is something that his boss needs to know about. So he types up a report and he gives it to the police chief, Jesse Curry, pictured here on the right with the glasses. And he said, Chief picked it up and looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. And he said, there's nothing to that. And he laid it back down. We said, okay, and walked out. So it wasn't just grammar. It was another officer who was listening to the same story and said, we need to tell Chief about this. And they both type up the report and they take it. But then Grammer acted like it was no big deal. So, all right, we did our job. Grammer says that Chief Curry told FBI later that he didn't even remember getting Billy's report. And Grammer says his fellow officer and 2 FBI agents stood behind him. In other words, Grammer had witnesses, right? Grammer had the fellow police officer, and then 2 other FBI agents who knew of this report and backed up his story. But to this day, that report has never surfaced, Grammer says. When all that happened on Sunday and Oswald was killed, I think probably Sunday afternoon, the chief probably shredded that thing and threw it in the trash because it disappeared. So here we have this phone call where Ruby, or somebody, it sounds just like Ruby, is talking to Grammer, whom he had just talked to for an hour. And he's telling him, listen, it's fixing to go down. I know what you guys are doing. I know you think you're going to put it, everybody thinks you're going to put him in that armored car. No, we know you're going to put him in this separate car. I know what time he's coming. I know what door he's coming out. I know where he's coming out. The Dallas police, the basement garage. And he's going to get shot down there in that basement. He's going to be killed. And I'm just calling you to let you know. And Grammer sort of says, Jack, is that you? And Jack hangs up the phone. That's on the 23rd. And of course, everybody knows what this is. This is on the 24th. So he walks up, he gets into the Dallas police garage, like he's been in the Dallas police all weekend in headquarters, in the hallways, and the media room. Now he's down where Oswald's going to be transferred. And within seconds, as soon as Oswald walks out the door, and he's pretty much exposed, you can see the guy escorting has a tan suit on. Everybody else has dark colored suits on. So if you lose Oswald in the crowd, just look for the guy in the tan suit. It's going to be easy to pick out. And he just walks right up to him because he's Jack Ruby. Nobody thinks anything about it. Sticks out that 38 and shoots him once. He had told police later he was going to try to shoot him 3 times. He only got 1 shot off. And as he's approaching him, about ready to shoot him, pistol drawn, he yells out, Oswald. And when asked later what the whole thing was about, he said to seal his lips. To seal his lips. And so in answer to that question, where's Waldo? We've seen the day before the assassination, Ruby was talking to the assistant DA, and he said something that stuck in the DA's mind. You don't know me now, but you will. The day of the assassination, he calls up Vanderslice and says, meet me at the Texas School Book Depository. We'll watch the fireworks. Interesting choice of words. At 11 o'clock, he's in a truck blocking traffic, and his passenger is taking a gun, a rifle, from the truck up the Grassy Knoll. Julia Ann Mercer looks at him. Ruby looks back at her. It's clear it's him. That's at 11 o'clock. They watch the assassination together, he and Vanderslice, and then somehow he gets to Parkland Hospital about the same time the motorcade gets there. Seth Cantor runs into him in the stairwell. They have this conversation. It's a strange conversation, but everything was strange at that time. Everybody was emotional, so Seth didn't really think much about it. He just knew he saw it, knew he talked to him. All of a sudden, where Ruby is, the CE 399 bullet shows up on a stretcher, which is going to be used by the Warren Commission to prove that it was one shooter. Then, when Oswald was fixing to be arrested at the Texas Theater, that happened quick. from the time that Johnny Brewer saw him and called it in to the time the police arrived, it was just minutes. And Ruby's sitting in the back of the Texas Theater watching it all. He's there before the police he's sitting back there, and when the police burst in, he's already there. He's got a front row seat watching all the action. And a witness saw him and talked to him, remembered his face. Then they haul Oswald off to Dallas police headquarters, and Ruby follows him and spends the next 2 days in Dallas police headquarters. Of course, we already know, independent of this, that Harold Hunt is sending his man down to find out what security looks like so they can seal the lips of this guy. He's a loose end, and he wants him taken out. And he says, have Joe Savella meet me at my house tomorrow morning. And right after that meeting, on the 22nd, Ruby shoots him. And of course, Joe Savella is the sort of the mafia boss of Dallas. He's not the boss, but you understand what I mean. He's the guy that the family sent to Dallas, and he's Ruby's boss. And we've already established the fact Ruby's connected to the mob. So any order that would come to Ruby would not come direct from Sam Giancana or Carlos Marcello or Santos Tropicante or even Harold Hunt. It would come through Joe Savella. So his access alone makes him the perfect guy to carry out this hit. All right, so what happens next? Minutes after the shooting, Ruby is in a holding cell. You can see him here. And the interrogator for Dallas Police, Don Archer, tells this story. He says, we had Ruby wired up to a heart monitor, as was standard operating procedure. His heart was racing. He was breathing heavy. He was sweating profusely. Archer said he gave him a towel because he was dripping with sweat. And he was pacing. He just back and forth, back and forth. You can see him here pacing. And he's rambling incoherently. He's not making any sense. Archer's trying to get a story out of him. And Ruby is acting preoccupied. Like, hold on, I'll tell you later. He's waiting for news. Like he's preoccupied, and he's just not making much sense. And everyone's waiting to hear if Oswald dies, because when he left, he was still alive. And Ruby seems the most concerned about this. Well, during his time, he keeps asking Archer for cigarettes. And he's just smoking one after another. He's shivering. He's shaking. He's in distress. And this isn't surprising, because Texas is a death penalty state. And if Oswald dies, this is murder one. And so Archer just naturally attributes Ruby's anxiety to the fact that he's afraid he's going to get the electric chair or whatever the means of execution was in Texas in those days. Well, a few minutes into this, a Dallas police officer sticks his head in the interrogation room and announces to Archer and to Ruby that Oswald has died. And so Archer says Ruby sat down, he relaxed, he starts smiling and joking with Archer and another police officer that was in there. His heart rate, remember he's got a heart monitor, returned to normal after the news. His breathing stabilized, he stopped sweating. He sat down, he wasn't pacing anymore. He wasn't shivering, he wasn't shaking. He's just stopped acting all agitated and talking in gibberish and all that. And Archer asked, you want a cigarette? And Ruby says, no, I don't smoke. And Archer said later, he says, it appeared to me that as long as he didn't know if Oswald was dead, he was in an apoplectic state. But as soon as he found out that Oswald was dead, it was like his life depended on carrying out that hit and doing it so successfully. He had intended to get 3 shots off. He didn't. He only got 1 shot off before he was tackled. And he didn't know if he'd hit his mark. And there's the possibility that he'd been given a task by people that he feared more than the Texas death penalty. He was more afraid of not fulfilling his task than he was of the electric chair. Because he's now that Oswald is dead, he is facing execution. He's facing a murder one rap. He hadn't seen a care. And what mattered was getting rid, like Harold Hunt said, to seal the lips of the most important witness in the JFK assassination, which was Lee Harvey Oswald. This is Oswald after top pictures are right after the autopsy, and the bottom pictures are as after his body's been prepared for his funeral. And of course, we told that story of the fingerprinting that took place in that funeral home. Paul Grudy told the story of the FBI showing up with the rifle and a fingerprinting kit after he'd prepared his body and got him all dressed up and cleaned up, ready for the casket. And then they left, and he had to re-clean him, put new clothes on him. And the FBI all of a sudden announces they've got a palm print and a fingerprint on the rifle. So going back to my questions, and I'm going to scroll back because I don't remember all of my questions. That's why I stick to one question normally. Okay, there we go. Is there any evidence that Jack Ruby had foreknowledge of the JFK assassination? Well, I think so. I think it's pretty clear when he tells Ben Ellis, "You don't know me now, but you will." No, that tells me that he knew the events that were going to go down and his role that he was going to have to play in this. And when he tells Vanderslice, "Let's go down to the Texas School Book Depository and watch the motorcade," he doesn't use the word motorcade, he doesn't use the word parade. He says, "Let's go watch the fireworks." Foreknowledge. Foreknowledge. And then the fact that everywhere the action takes place over the next couple of days, he beats everybody to the punch. Like, okay, the assassination is going to happen, and the government's going to say it's going to happen all at the Texas School Book Depository. So that's where we're going to be. After the shooting, they're going to go to Parkland. So that's where I'm going to be. They're going to arrest Oswald at the Texas Theater. So that's where I'm going to be. They're going to take him to Dallas Police Headquarters. So that's where I'm going to be. And then they're going to transfer him out to Dallas Police Department headquarters, the basement garage. So that's where I'm going to be. He even, and we'll learn this probably not tomorrow, but on Monday's episode, he even walks up to a guy in a van and taps on the window, a media guy that he knows, on the 24th, and asks him, like he's stalking the police garage, "Have they brought him out yet? Have they brought him out yet?" I mean, he's just always there. So is there any evidence that Jack Ruby's own actions were premeditated? Yeah, there's evidence. They tried to make it like it was a spontaneous thing, but the whole weekend he's stalking the prey and getting ready. There's some evidence that he even got his finances in order and gave access to a deposit box at the bank to his lawyer and said, "You handle this. I'm going to be gone for a little while." I mean, everything smacks of premeditation in this entire scenario. Where's Waldo? Well, we discussed that, all the different places he ends up with. Besides his FBI, CIA, Mafia connections, what other connections did Ruby have that made it possible for him to shoot Oswald? Well, he had connections with the Dallas police and the DA, and that gave him access to Dallas police headquarters. It gave him access to the police garage, parking garage. And so he's got all these connections that we learned about yesterday, but then today we learned that he's got connections to Dallas police and the DA, which is why Henry Wade didn't blink an eye, didn't bat an eye when Ruby interrupts him at the press conference and says, "That's the Fair Play for Cuba Committee." And then last question, how do Ruby's actions after the shooting indicate his life depended on killing Oswald? I mean, this is anecdotal, but when you just look at him, you see that until he knew that he had succeeded in killing Oswald, he was a nervous wreck. But as soon as he found out he had succeeded, Oswald was dead, laughing, cutting up with his friends, these officers that knew him. They call him by his first name. He's not sweating anymore. His heart's not racing. Stopped smoking, sat down, no pacing. I mean, in just about every way, you see that Jack Ruby had advanced knowledge of what was fixed to go down, even up to including his part in it, which wasn't just to shoot Oswald. Evidently, he was the delivery guy for the Grassy Knoll shooter, or one of them, if there were more than one, according to Julianne Mercer. So, if you were going to have to dispose of a very important witness, and that's what Oswald was, and he's surrounded by security you would think would be the most secure location on earth at this time, because this is the most important witness on earth at this time. You're going to have somebody who has access, who knows the authorities, who knows the building, who knows the layout, who knows that, oh yeah, he's not going to be in that armored car. He's going to be in a separate car. I know what door he's coming at. You got to have someone on the inside knows all that. And I'm just throwing in some extra stuff here, but you think about who his attorney was, who got appointed as his attorney almost right away. He's one of the biggest mafia attorneys in the country. And we'll talk about that later, but I mean, immediately he gets appointed as his attorney. So from beginning to end, starting with Ruby's connections to all these different moving parts, the mafia, the Teamsters, the CIA, the Cubans, the mafia, obviously, and then today Dallas police and the DA's office. He's perfect. He is perfectly situated. He blends with all these different crowds. And his statements betray foreknowledge. His actions show complicity. The sightings of him in all these different places, usually before everybody else gets there, shows foreknowledge. And then his actions after the shooting show a man whose life depended on carrying out the hit. And when it was successful, he breathed a sigh of relief. So Ruby is not who the Warren Commission would have you believe. And he was not just some distraught club owner that acted spontaneously without premeditation. Far from that. And this is why I started off yesterday saying what the Warren Commission said about Jack Ruby was so laughable on its face. It throws into doubt everything else the Warren Commission said in its report. And of course, they did all the same stuff. Everything they say about Ruby, they say about Oswald. And we found out yesterday, not only were they not that, they actually knew each other. And on the night, on the morning of the assassination, they were meeting at B&B restaurant, having a conversation with each other, according to two waitresses. So one can almost imagine Ruby calling out Oswald's name as he approaches to shoot him. Oswald! And Ruby or Oswald looking up and seeing somebody he knows and just met with, just had breakfast with a gun pointed at him, being a little bit surprised, maybe, but certainly recognizing who his assailant was. And so that's the story of Jack Ruby. The next episode, which will be 37, we'll be looking at what happens to Ruby then, because this topic I call the two most important witnesses. So obviously, if you are in this conspiracy, the people who usually end up dead are the ones that carry out, the ones you set up to be the patsy and the one who carries out the killing of the patsy. Those two for sure have to be taken out. So they use Ruby to take out the most important witness, which is Oswald. No trial. And then they're going to have to pay close attention and give special consideration to the second most important witness, which is Jack Ruby. And so we'll deal with that. I think we'll take tomorrow off, Sunday off, and then come back on Monday morning, and we'll talk about what happens to Jack Ruby. Okay, if you are interested in anything else, any more content that I provide, check out my website, sphistory.com or barryljones.com. I provide history content for homeschool students, curriculum, or for U.S. history, for world history, for U.S. government, also for JFK assassination. There's books, there's blogs, there's podcasts. There's also an opportunity for you, if you have a homeschool student that you want me to personally teach, do online classes, there's that option as well. So sphistory.com, or like I said, barryljones.com. If you like what you're seeing and hearing, feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. Feel free to hit the notification bell so you'll know when I drop content, and then also hit the thumbs up. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will see you on the other side. We'll talk later. Goodbye.